who, when they want to go to a website, actually types the name of the website into Google? No? Into the browser bar? But it's not uncommon. I mean, a lot of people type the name of other, and a lot of people like go to Yahoo by typing Yahoo into Google. So if you're in charge, or if you're working someplace and you want your content to be found, it's important that you have some fairly good understanding of how Google and other search engines, mostly Google because that's what most people use, find things. And so there's something called search engine optimization, or SEO, which are a set of rules, if you so want, that if you follow those rules with your content, then your content is more likely to be found. And so it's a good idea to read up on SEO. There's, again, the great resources online. There's something called SEO Moz, M-O-Z, which is a blog where they talk a lot about the latest trends in SEO. It turns out that a lot of publishers, and by publishers I don't mean necessarily publishing. When we use the word publishers, we mean anybody who creates content on the web. A lot of publishers on the web are still behind when it comes to SEO, and so they're often surprised that they say, well, we have this great content, and when I type into Google I don't find it, because they don't understand some of the basics of SEO. So let me just give you some examples. For instance, Google much prefers clean URLs. So if the URL actually says something about what the content is about, Google will give that more value in its search results. Now, a lot of publishers, like the New York Times and some others, until recently had old content management systems, and they had these really terribly looking URLs. It was like NewYorkTimes.com and then a whole bunch of numbers, seemingly random numbers with question marks and all sorts of other crud in it. And so Google didn't like that very much. The other thing that Google looks for a lot is, probably the single most important things, is other sites that link to the site. Well, guess what? If you have terrible URLs, it's hard for people to link, even if they just try to copy and paste. And then a lot of publishers did something even worse, which is they move content around. So they didn't have what's called a permalink. Today on the web, everything tries to have a permalink, which basically means the URL never changes. Once you've published the content, that's where it stays. So people used to have these content management systems where when an article appeared on the front page, it had one URL, and then the next day, when it moved somewhere else in the site, it had a different URL. Well, if somebody linked to the front page, it now no longer linked to the article. And it turns out people still make those mistakes every day today. So learning about that is something very useful to learn about. I think the other thing that we do here a lot, and we think is sort of essential to the internet experience, is to try out new services. Some of them will turn out to be useful, others will not. But the great thing is it's very low cost to explore new services on the internet. Who has an iPhone? So I think the other thing that is a big trend and that really is happening is that mobile access to the internet is changing the way people are using the internet. And the iPhone, which has fewer units than lots of other phones, accounts for a far greater portion of all internet. So most they look at mobile browsers, it's about 60 to 80% iPhone, even though iPhone market share of smartphones is maybe 20% at best, just because the experience is so different and so much better. So if you don't have one, at least trying one out is a good idea, just to get a sense of what the mobile experience can be like, probably will be like on most phones going forward. Other things that maybe come to mind are who has Googled their own name, or who Googles their own name on a regular basis? Nothing wrong with it, it's a good thing, you should be doing it. You may have already talked about that, but you should SEO your own name. I mean, you should own your own name. That's easier for somebody like myself, Albert Banger. It's a completely distinctive name. So if you're Jack Smith, it's a lot harder.
What does it mean to own your own name?
Well, you want to somehow come up, relatively early in the search results, and you want to come up with content that you control, not something that somebody else has written about you, or some random Facebook post, or some picture that somebody took and post it somewhere else. So.
Shouldn't they reserve their?
Well, if you yes, absolutely. I mean, one thing that's great is if you can reserve your name in other services. So you know, on a service like Twitter, first come first served for names. You know, people have different feelings about that as to whether they want to use the true identity or whether they want to use some made up username. If you use the same name and if you use your real name wherever you can get it, it will actually in some way make it a lot easier for you to establish a strong online presence because the same name will be pulled together everywhere. But it also means that if you're planning on misbehaving, it's probably not such a good idea.
Can you talk a little bit about privacy? I mean, that's one of the concerns in terms of fear of exposing too much or getting out there and establishing your presence.
You know, someone said at the lunch that Debbie talked at, if I don't want to be found, just kind of wanting
Right.
to contain some movement.
Well, I think, we think a lot about that because different services have different levels of control. So Facebook gives you a lot of control as to who can see what. But what people tend to forget is that anything you can do or send electronically can also be copied electronically. And so, people will take a screenshot of Facebook and post it someplace else. So just because you have the theoretical privacy control, that's something that you do on Facebook, only gets seen by people you've friended or have in some subgroup. That doesn't mean that you're not actually creating an electronic record that is easily accessible and postable everywhere on the internet. So I think the general rule for behavior on the internet is you probably don't want to do things that you wouldn't be comfortable if they would show up under your name in Google, because that's pretty much what can happen. So I think certain things have a presumption of privacy, but it's not real at the end of the day, because the screenshot is as simple as hitting two screens on your computer, and that's how lots of things
I think
come up.
the question was more if you're shy or sort of feel not comfortable getting out there and digitally and engaging people and having that digital footprint.
I'm not sure that there's much we can do about that.
But isn't the idea of, is it better to control your presence versus having others control, to your point?
Well, I think that's why you want to Google your name. You want to make sure that, ideally you have some presence, even if it's just a simple place where you have a placeholder and you sort of say, this is me. It usually is pretty easy to convince Google, again, unless you're Jack Smith, that, you can have some presence that you control, where you can have your resume or whatever it is, or write about things. But it's hard because some people don't want to say anything to be found, and I don't think that's something that technology is not going to change that necessarily. I'm trying to think whether there's anything else that's basic, but I'm